Justus, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You also tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey and background as to you've got Madpaws now, but you've had a couple of businesses in the past that have been quite successful. Do you want to just go through where you started?
Yeah, sure. I'm originally German. I came to Australia now over 16 years ago. I've actually studied macroeconomics in Germany, but then figured out pretty quickly that I don't want to end up in an insurance company or a bank. So I actually started working for a startup in Germany. That was my first step into kind of entrepreneurship or building startups. And I'm not a traditional kind of entrepreneur that was selling oranges from the front yard. My kind of passion was more sports at the beginning, and then I found my way into business. And so came to Australia in 2007, worked for a startup here first, and then started my own first company, which was Spreets. Spreets was Australia's biggest company that was selling vouchers. So you might know Groupon. We were the number one back then. We sold that company to Yahoo 7 in 2011 and then stayed on for a little while. And since then, I've been involved in all kinds of different businesses from an investor perspective, but also starting different businesses. I've been an early investor in Airtasker, for example. And now we've started another business called Madpaws in 2015. And that's a business I'm running at the moment. So that's Australia's leading pet ecosystem. We've got everything that you need for your pets, 40,000 pet sitters on the site. So when you go overseas, you can find somebody to look after your pet, all the way down to products, medication, anything to make your pet as healthy and happy as possible.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. I'll get to Madpaws in a minute, but I think we've had Tim Fung on our show.
Yeah.
We've had Mick Labinskas and Phil. We've had Phil on the show as well. And I was really interested in terms of Spreets, as they were investors, but I'm really interested to hear a little bit of the story, that 10-month journey from start to exit, which was phenomenal, from the founder's perspective. Do you want to tell us, the listeners, a little bit about that from your side of things?
Yeah, sure. Look, it was a wild ride, and I think we got quite lucky, right? I mean, with kind of any startup, any company, I think a couple of things that come to play. It's not all skill. It's always a bit of luck in terms of timing and, being at the right place at the right time. And so I think we were at the right place at the right time, right? So I was looking to build a group buying company. I had investors in Germany kind of lined up, and I ran into Dean. Dean was my co-founder with Spreets, and we kind of decided that we're going to do it together. And so Mick and Phil were back then with Pollenizer. And the lucky thing is we had a team, they had a tech team. And I think one of the advantages that we had in that kind of setup was that we had all the right components to be successful for that business. And that was, we had investors who were willing to, put their money where their mouth is. And they were very much about, this business is about speed and being the number one as quickly as you can. So they were not the kind of investors you found back then in Australia where they were normally quite conservative and making sure, that on every second call, you kind of talk about when you become cash flow positive. They were very much about growth, and we've got to grow this thing as fast as we can, be the number one as fast as we can, and then also find an exit as fast as we can, right? And so I think that was kind of, the components that we had with the investors, with Phil and Mick from Pollenizer, supporting kind of us from a tech perspective. And then Dean and myself had a fairly good skill set that we needed. So I was very marketing data orientated. He was kind of very sales orientated, and that's exactly what we needed for that business. So that combined with being at the right time, the right place, I think made it possible that we kind of grew that business we had over 1.5 million subscribers in less than a year, I think. And we sold it to Yahoo 7 in just under a year. I think these things kind of came together. There were some decisions that I look back on now where you go like, oh shit, we could have really gotten this wrong. For example, we nearly switched platforms once, just 2-3 months before we sold it to Yahoo 7 to the platform that our investors were using in Germany, which from a tech perspective was probably slightly better than where we were, but it was a different technology. And if we would have made that switch, Yahoo 7 would have never bought us because they couldn't have supported that technology. Some of those things just lined up perfectly for this to kind of happen.
I mean, it's one thing and it's very rare still for someone to build a $40 million business to exit in 10 years, let alone sort of 10, 12 months.
Yeah.
What was that? How can you give us a sort of a snapshot of just how wild that ride is, or how quickly things move when that sort of thing's happening?
Yes. Look, it was probably the most stress I've ever been in my life was just before we sold that company, because it was so quick and, obviously life-changing for me and for Dean. And we had kind of like you said, the lifetime of a standard startup or company condensed into 10 months, right? So it was certainly a extremely busy time. So 7 days a week, we worked like crazy hours. I got up at 5:30 in the morning sending emails because we didn't have it automated. We couldn't automate it yet. So everything was kind of manual on the back. But we had a very clear kind of focus on where we wanted to get to. And again, kind of our investors were also very good in pushing us in that direction, right? So if we would have had different investors that wouldn't have been as pushy, potentially we wouldn't have been as fast, which meant we wouldn't have been the number one, and we would have never had that exit. So again, it kind of worked out. But it was certainly a extreme roller coaster in terms of emotions, because that business is also extremely day to day, right? So you've got a good deal, you're like happy, and you go out with the sales team at night, and then next morning you get a call from your investor, why you're only selling 50 vouchers. It's very much the quality of the deal that you have on the website makes or breaks the business on a day-to-day basis. So very stressful time.
Yeah. And obviously the stars align, like you say, you've got to have a little bit of luck along the way with things from a timing perspective. But obviously execution is a big part of it. You've obviously seen that this is a business that can work, and that there were other businesses like that around the world sort of popping up at that time from memory. But again, the stars have to align. Have you seen any sort of example of a business like that ever since then? Or is it just one of those things where everything just, in terms of the speed of, you could go, we could do that?
Well, I mean, you probably have seen it in crypto, right? In terms of the speed of stuff kind of happening. Well, I'm certainly not the crypto expert, but there were companies out there, at least from a valuation perspective and customer signups and so forth, that were ahead of us from that perspective. But other than that, particularly in kind of the retail space, I've never seen anything like that in terms of that speed. And that's, I think Groupon in the US was the fastest growing business to $1 billion ever. And so that's for good reason, right? But I think it's kind of that kind of time where that could have happened, because customers were just getting excited about the internet, right? They're kind of just learning the way around it. There's still very, very kind of basic retail offerings online. And suddenly we come around and go like, hey, here's, 70, 80% off on whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of worked, and it really had that kind of hype. And so that kind of hype I've only seen in crypto anytime after that.
Okay. And then once you've exited that, did you take a little bit of time after that before going to the next venture? And what was that process like?
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds always good to sell a company for $40 million, right? But then you realize, obviously I had investors, you had Dean and so forth. So you don't end up with $40 million, unfortunately. But, you make a very good amount of money. And the first thing is you go like, oh, cool, I'll never have to work again. Then you realize, oh shit, I can't even buy a good house from that in Sydney. So you kind of go through a bit of a process, kind of, because it was so quick as well for us, right? And
what
it actually means, and what you want to do with your life as well, right? Because I think at that time I was like 30, 33 or whatever. It was certainly too early for me to, not do anything anymore. I mean, being far from being able to do that either. So I kind of very quickly went into the next thing and went into, investing a little bit more, right? And trying to help other businesses and other startups, but then also looking at kind of what's the next business I want to build. And so I kind of got quite heavily involved in a couple of businesses. One was kind of more like a beauty business I've built actually with my partner back then. And another business was in the golf space that I started with a couple of guys in Germany, where we started a company called Rice Golf. Golf was, I'm a basketballer by kind of background. That's kind of what I did when I was younger. But then when I came to Australia, I started playing golf. So it was one of my big passions from a sport perspective, and kind of aligned really well and actually became a great business. But I think the thought process I went through there was kind of just a very quick realization that sitting at home while everyone else still has to work and stuff is not very fun. So luckily I didn't fall into that hole that quite a few founders kind of fall into, where they then just think, okay, I do a little bit of investing and otherwise I enjoy life. I kind of luckily kept myself quite busy fairly quickly, which I think helped me to kind of then keep on going rather than falling in a bit of a hole.
And what was it that made you realize that the pet industry was where your next part of your journey was going to be?
I think it was really a bit of a joint effort from a couple of us that started that business, because we're interested in a couple of different things. One was marketplaces. I was very close to Airtasker, so we learned a lot about marketplaces, kind of how that works, how the dynamic works. We obviously at that time marketplaces were quite the thing, in terms of from investor interest and so forth. And so we kind of looked around that thematic, and at the same time looked at markets that are underserviced, right? And so we had quite a lot of customer interactions then where we talked to people with pets and so forth, and very quickly realized, hey, there's actually something to be done here. It was the time where Pet Circle went live online, right? So we were like, okay, pet retail is probably not the space we necessarily want to go in now, but there's nobody actually covering the services space. And so this is kind of where we started thinking about Madpaws, and we saw a big opportunity, and we thought because we knew how hard it is to build a services marketplace, right? Because we could see that with the Airtasker, but we could also see that if you get it to a certain level, it's a great moat, and it's actually quite a defensible business model where you need sitters and owners geographically very close together. That's not something you can scale super quickly. So if you can get that to scale, it should be a very defensible business.
Yeah. And in terms of as you're building this business, what were the biggest lessons that you took away from going through that process with Spreets that sort of helped fast track? Not that you needed fast tracking necessarily, but what were the lessons that you took from that sort of made you think a little bit differently about how you did things, or was it more there were parts of what you did that you were able to replicate in a new one?
Yeah, good question. So, I think the one thing about Spreets that I learned later on was that not everything goes as fast as Spreets, right? So I think we had to unlearn a couple of things that we did with Spreets, potentially, just because Spreets was such a unique business in terms of, it was, you said that at the beginning, right? That was all about execution. Like, we had a business in the US, Groupon, that was clear kind of how this works, and we essentially copied most of that. The pet business was very different. That was very much about actually finding product market fit first and scaling it at a speed that allows us to survive as well, right? Because Spreets had the unique dynamic of throwing money in on one side and kind of very quickly getting that money back from customers if you were good in your acquisition strategy, where the marketplace is very different, right? Like the marketplace, you can't throw money at the services marketplace and expect it to come back very quickly. It has a longer dynamic, and you've kind of built liquidity first in different areas. You can't super scale that, right? So I think we had to unlearn a couple of things there. I think the one thing that I always take away from the Spreets experience is this whole, and this was again very much kind of our investors kind of pushing us as well, is make quick decisions, right? Like just don't waste time making decisions. And I think that's kind of one of the things that I've kind of kept with me for my whole startup journey, is making sure that you don't overthink things. You don't try to get it 100% right, but once you've got enough convictions, you just go with it and live with the result, right? So you'd rather do that and do a lot of decisions than procrastinate and not make decisions.
Yeah. But as far as you're making decisions there, was there a level of patience that you had to learn for the new business, given that it was moving at a different pace?
Yeah, 100%.
To the first one? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So I think that's what I was saying. Like we had to unlearn a couple of things, right? In terms of the speed and how we're going at things, and also the, our desire to kind of scale the business quickly, because they're like, well, we did it with Spreets. Like, why doesn't this grow as fast as the other one? You kind of have to find a new keel and figure out kind of what's the right speed for the business, right? And every business is different. Now, nicely, there's a lot of parallels in any business that you can go back and hopefully avoid some of the mistakes you've made in the past, right? So it seems to get easier, but there's always new challenges, right?
Always new challenges. Yeah.
It's always new stuff. And I think that's what you've got to kind of live with, right? You've got to be willing to kind of, go head first into those challenges and trying to figure them out.
And it's not even challenges in terms of the business or finding the product market fit or anything to do with that. Sometimes they're out of your control, like COVID and those sorts of things. Suddenly that hits. How did you guys deal with that? Because I imagine that's a difficult one to do in that sort of industry.
Yeah, that wasn't nice. That was like we lost with the marketplace. We lost 90% of our revenue pretty much in 2 weeks, because everyone was going from we're going on holidays to, oh no, we're locked down now, and we can't go anywhere. So that was it was a very tough time for for the marketplace and a very challenging time for us to kind of go through and figure this out. But luckily, we kind of realized then, I think the whole team of Madpaws, every employee was super helpful in this time. They all wanted to kind of make sure that we kind of get out on the other side and still have a business. So, everyone was willing to kind of reduce their salaries for that time, and at the same time still willing to kind of work out stuff so we can get through it. That was awesome to see, and as I think was kind of a showing us the quality of the team that we had within Madpaws. And and then we realized, within 2-3 months of the pandemic, we realized there's a big upside to this as well, right? And a lot of people are buying pets. Right? It's literally the time where kennels were empty, and everyone was just buying pets wherever they could because they stayed home and they were like, oh, this is the time to get one. I think we had 25 or 28% more dogs after the pandemic than before the pandemic.
Oh, really?
So there's a whole lot of new customers out there now willing to look for our products and services.
Yeah. And as you go through that process, what does that do to your team culture? You face that sort of existential crisis from the business perspective, and people obviously have to make those sacrifices. But then you come out the other side. Do you notice the difference in terms of the team, the culture, that sort of thing?
So, I think our culture was we're pretty, tight-knit startup from the beginning. Right? So that was the advantage. And, a lot of the people that work here also work for the passion with pets. Right? They have pets, they bring pets to the office. So I think that was already ingrained into the company. I think if anything, the pandemic then kind of pulled us even closer together and kind of really identified the people that were there for the right reasons and really kind of wanted to pull through. And we also lost some people in that time, obviously, right? Which is perfectly fine. But I think we came out of it on the other side with even a stronger team, right? Because everyone knew, look, if we can get through those shitty times, we're in a pretty good position to kind of go through any other challenges. So I think, that was kind of very positive, the whole experience. And I think also the team was quite appreciative on how we tried to handle it. Like, we were trying to be extremely open about the whole situation. We kind of shared with them, our cash balance, where we are and how do we have to make this work and how do we get through it. So we didn't try to kind of hold stuff from them and kept them in the lurch. We're very open about and said, this is what we have to do. This is where we need to get to. And so they were kind of part of the journey. And I think that kind of increased the trust that they had in us as well.
And what did you learn about your own leadership style and strengths as you went through that sort of process?
Look, I still think I've got a lot to learn in terms of leadership and so forth. I think one of the things that I've learned, that's probably, again, kind of going back to my basketball days, is I think I'm pretty good in kind of identifying the people that we need to do to get a certain job done and then trying to get them onto that journey. And I think what I've learned through that time was even communicating more than before, and the importance of kind of keeping people involved in the process and giving them full clarity on kind of why we're doing certain things. Because, sometimes you just tend to get stuff done and do it and tell the team and, not really why, but this is the decision. So in that process, we had to go a lot deeper and kind of explaining why we're doing certain things. And that, I think, got them onto the journey a lot more.
Is there anything that you identify within your own style that is a weakness? And how do you, if there's something that comes to mind, how do you overcome that in business?
Yeah, good question. I've got plenty of weaknesses, I think. But one is certainly, even though I'm German, I'm probably the least organized German in the world. But not the least, right? But I think that was kind of my challenge from when I was younger. I was not very interested in school when I grew up. I was playing basketball most of the time, and I think that's where I got my competitive spirit from. Right, so that kind of competitiveness is, I think, what really kind of helped me throughout my whole career. But if you think about it, what I had to learn throughout the time was kind of putting more frameworks in place for me not to get distracted too much, right? Because I'm also easily distracted by the next shiny thing, or something else to do, or something else we can improve on, rather than kind of getting the stuff done that I started. So I think over time I've gotten a lot better now in terms of, it started off with paper to-do lists. Now I've got obviously a to-do list. I've got my daily to-do list, and it's still a daily struggle for me to kind of sit down and kind of organize that on a daily basis of what I want to do. But the good days that I have is the ones where I'm organized. I know what I want to do. I tick those things off and the day is over, right? Rather than just kind of freestyling it through the whole day. That's kind of the stuff that I got better at, but I still work on.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I think a lot of people struggle with those sorts of things. There's sometimes an inertia in terms of doing the things that you really have set down to do for the day versus the thing that might be the most interesting to do for the day, right? There's always that battle.
Exactly. And it's so easy to fall into it, right? Where you go, here's the five things to do. You do the things that are, you're most used to or easiest to do, but might have the least amount of impact, right? So suddenly at the end of the day, and you feel like, yeah, I've done all this stuff, but really, the impact's been pretty low. So kind of forcing yourself to do that is quite powerful.
The funny thing with that sort of stuff is that, and I find this personally, is that there might be a job that is the most important job of the day, and sometimes it is hard to get into it when there's other stuff going on. But I've found that if I make myself sit down for like a few minutes to just start it and go, I'll just do 5 minutes on it, then it's so much easier to get into it. And before you know it, you've done it in half an hour, and it seemed like it was going to be a half a day job, and it really wasn't. But it just seemed like that. And sitting down and just doing it, it's funny, the little mind games you got to play with yourself sometimes.
100%. I mean, this is, the one thing I've learned there is kind of also in terms of basketball back then, right, is kind of forming habits, right? That's the strongest thing you can do, right? And I think, so if you can somehow, whether it's my training, whether it's diet or whatever it is, right? Like once you get to the point where it's a habit, it's like infinitively easier. And so if you find that time to, sit down and do a task that you don't want to do, and you form some kind of habit that you do that once or twice a day or whatever it is, right? Then suddenly it becomes a lot easier.
And I think basketball is a great sport for that, more so than many other sports. I'm a big basketball fan, played as a kid a lot. And whether it's LeBron or Jordan or Kobe or anyone, they always will talk about their habits and doing things that way, and the importance of that. And it really does relate to all parts of life.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's why, if you look at some of and also kind of in how I realized what great basketballers do, right? Because when I was young, I looked at Michael Jordan back then, and then later Kobe, and I was like, there's just freak talents and it's crazy, right? But the reality is that it's like, and I always say this for startups as well, right? Like an idea is a bit like talent, without working on it, it's worth nothing, right? And it's very true for all those guys, right? You look at Jordan, LeBron, Kobe, they are the hardest workers by a mile, right? So yes, they were talented, but really their success came from their work ethic. And Kobe obviously went way too early, but you could see how that kind of translates then into life after basketball as well, right? Like he's been very successful with anything he touched afterward.
Yeah, all to do with that mindset.
Yeah,
100%. What about the best advice you were ever given along the way when you were in the midst of that journey? Actually, I asked for 2 pieces of advice. One when you were doing Spreets, and one in this business, which is a different sort of tempo.
Yeah, okay. Well, Spreets, I think I touched on at the beginning, the speed of decision making. I think that was kind of really where it changed my mind, how we're doing things, right? Because I came from startups. I did startups before in Germany as well as here, but we were never at that kind of level where we just land like, no, okay, look at it, get to 60% conviction in that business, and then you go. Right? And so I think that business was all about making as many decisions as you could on a daily basis, roll with it, and live with the result. And obviously, the other thing we learned there is never do a change and not track it. Right? I think that's something, and it's very much if you talk to anybody that worked with the Samba brothers, who also kind of copying businesses back in the days, a lot of the US businesses won't like them very much, but what they were very good at was executing, right? Looking at something, executing on it. And they were doing the same thing, right? They were saying, you can make any decision, you make it quick, but if you can't show me the result afterwards, you're in trouble. And so that's essentially the same mindset that we had, right? We kind of made sure that we do as many tests as we could, but we also tracked them. And it was very different time back then than it was now, right? Like we still had to hack kind of Excel files together to figure out certain conversion rates and lifetime values and so forth, where now you've got great tools to do that for you.
Got software for everything these days. It's come a long way, hasn't it, in a short period of time?
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing.
And what about the current business? What sort of advice have you been given when you've been doing Madpaws that really stands out?
Yeah, so I mean, Madpaws, I think, was much more a business where we had to figure it out ourselves. I think we got a lot of good advice from Tim, obviously, because he's gone through the same journey. Tim has been on our board for a while. We learned a lot from him, I think, at the beginning in terms of what's actually the harder part to build, because it's a two-sided marketplace. So you've got customers on one side, you've got supply or pet sitters on the other side, and at the beginning, we were always thinking, it's probably harder to find pet sitters and demand's going to come. The reality is demand's kind of the hard bit to find for services marketplaces. And so that is something where we've learned quite a bit, because we kind of knew that from Tim and his experience with Airtasker. And so we could focus on that a lot earlier and trying to figure out kind of how can we drive demand rather than just, hoping that we put a bit of supply on it and then the demand's going to come by itself. So I think a lot of those kind of intricacies of the marketplace, which we're still learning on today, 9 years into the journey, we're still figuring out the marketplace on a day-to-day basis. It's still one of the hardest ones to do what I said before, which is kind of, you change one thing here and you want to track it. But on a marketplace, much harder to do, right? Because you've got so many inputs into a conversion of a customer, right? Because again, you've got those two sides and you've got time delays with bookings and so forth. It's a lot harder to do that, and we're still kind of on the journey to kind of optimizing that. We're obviously much better now than at the beginning, but that's essentially for the marketplace. That's the biggest challenge that we always have. It's kind of we want to track every single change. We want to do a lot of changes and do a lot of tests, but at the same time, how do we make sure we track them and actually see the impact?
Yeah, which is just essential, right? Otherwise, what does it mean?
No, exactly. Yeah, and so that I think the learning that we had along the way there was very much around going back to kind of the speed side, right? The side of things is, better to do less changes on the marketplace concurrently to make sure that you actually see the impact and can measure it than doing too many at the same time and then sitting there going like, which one was it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You better have the answer, right? In terms of the business people that inspire you, anyone come to mind?
I'm terrible on that one. I'm not a very businessy guy. That kind of, I always have to go back to kind of my sports stars that inspired me.
That's just as valid if you ask me.
So there's a couple of things like, one, grew up with basketball, right? So obviously Michael Jordan was my kind of hero. I'm exactly the same height. I'm exactly the same weight as him when I played basketball, and I'm a lot more shit than him. But he was the guy that I kind of looked up to from a basketball perspective. And then kind of along the way, I think Kobe inspired me, and we've got a signed Kobe jersey here in the office because we always talk about Mamba mentality.
Yeah.
So Mamba mentality essentially is exactly what we're trying to do, right? It's kind of you go out every day and get better every day, or you learn something every day. And so I think that's kind of we're trying to take that and instill it into the company, and that worked really well. And then the other one is probably Dirk Nowitzki. I used to play with Dirk Nowitzki when I was in the under 20s national team in Germany. I played against him a couple of times in the league in Germany as well. And he was so close to us back then, right? So we kind of grew up with him. And then when he went to the NBA, it was kind of so like unbelievable that happened. But then kind of seeing how he kind of took it all, and how humble he stayed, and I think he's just a really cool guy from everything I could see on the outside. It's not like I'm close to him or anything, right? But kind of how he handled it and how he handled the success that he had, and kind of what he's done for kind of German basketball is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Oh, he's an all-time legend and just one of the greatest players, and underrated and underappreciated probably in many respects. But unbelievable. Yeah,
look, because he won the one championship in America, since he won that, I think in America he's a superstar, right? Whatever, top 7 all-time scorer in the NBA. So all those things you kind of look at and go like, that's unbelievable. If you've seen him when he was 18, 19, he was this lanky little, lanky, huge guy.
7 foot tall still.
Yeah. But again, he was the guy who was in the gym at 6 o'clock in the morning with his personal coach doing shooting drills, right? And kind of paid off.
Yeah. You would have been happy with the World Cup result, yes. Presumably.
Yes. Very happy with the result, obviously. Very unhappy that I wasn't there, because I kind of had a chance. A friend of mine went there actually, and he ended up partying with the team at in the team bus. In the hotel
right.
stuff. So I was like, damn it, I should have made that journey. But
That would have been a bucket list item, that one. But sure.
100%.
And in terms of business books, we can go to The Mammoth Mentality as a business book if need be, because that is a great book. I've bought that for people before and said, read this. Best business book you'll ever read.
Well, so I mean, there's a couple, that kind of everyone talks to. So, but I think that again, kind of the ones that inspired me the most were probably the ones that are more about kind of personal development. So when you talk about personal development, The Power of Habit was one that I actually really enjoyed. Who wrote it? But The Power of Habit is kind of is going through this whole human cycle of why things get easier once they become a habit, right? And how do you build habits? And so I think that was one that kind of always stuck with me. And it's also one that we're trying to do within the company, right? Like, if we can build like positive habits or good habits within the team, that's what we're trying to do, right? And so we talk about this quite a bit and trying to kind of steer the team towards that. So that was one that kind of stuck with me for a long time. And then the other one I quite liked, From Good to Great. From Good to Great, which is
Jim Collins.
Yeah. So that one I quite liked, and I kind of reread it now because I think it's more relevant to me now with, Madpaws now is 130, 140 people. So we're getting a little bit closer to, they obviously looked at much bigger businesses as well, but where you can translate some of their learnings around leadership and so forth into kind of our day-to-day a little bit more, right? And so that is one. Anyway, and I also like it because it's actually scientific in terms of, at least to a degree, in terms of the number of companies that they looked at, and I was really trying to figure out the success factors because, there's always a book about any business that was successful, and it's written in hindsight, and normally it's the same thing, and I can't read them anymore.
They've got sort of they've done the mathematics behind it. It's a research paper that's been turned into a book effectively, and they've got the control group as well against.
I mean, I think that's some 10 years that they followed a couple of companies and data that they went back to, and then really kind of tried to identify what are the success factors, right? Was it the CEO? Was it the team? Was it the market that they were in, and trying to kind of figure out what was what. And so that's quite interesting to see, from a scientific perspective. There's one other one actually, which I read probably 2 years ago now. It's called The 7 Powers, but that is very detailed, mathematical. Kind of looks at, again, kind of success factors for companies from a competitive perspective, and what do you have to look at to be a scalable, successful business. So if somebody likes their math, and this is certainly not one to read late at night, you'd be falling asleep very quickly. But there's some
7 Powers.
Yeah, there's some really good stuff in there.
Yeah, okay, good. We'll have to make a note of that one. In terms of the business, you raised money when you did the first business, and with this next business, you're now listed on a stock exchange.
Yep.
What are the pros and cons of that process?
Yeah, so the pros were quite clear. It was just after the pandemic, pet ownership was going through the roof. We know we had to raise money to kind of get to the next level, and we were just at that inflection point of where we made the decision on whether we want to stay with the marketplace and just do the marketplace, or whether we want to actually do what we've done now, which has become more of a pet ecosystem. And so, for us, the advantage of going with the listing was that we could raise more money and had more access to capital, at least at that time, on the public markets, right? And so we kind of did the IPO, we raised a bit of money, we acquired 3 businesses since then, which helped us to kind of get to scale. We're now running at over 35 million revenue run rate, and a kind of clear still 50% growth year on year. But now the market's obviously changed, right? And so I think that's probably one of the disadvantages of the public markets is you have like extreme swings there suddenly in terms of your valuations. Our valuation's down now 40-50%, even though with 12 times the business or 15 times the business.
Yeah. This is nature of the market.
But the market just at the moment just looks at small caps and medium caps, and there's probably a little bit more, I'll trade up into kind of big caps. And so that is probably a challenge for us now to kind of get out of that. make sure that we still get to scale. We want to get to 100 mil revenue fairly quickly, but how do we get there? So that's probably the challenge that we're in now. But we've changed our focus a little bit from growth to profitability. We're kind of on the brink to profitability now, and I think that will again kind of open up a whole lot of opportunities for us. And we're in control of our own destiny, right? We don't have to raise money to kind of do anything. We kind of then decide when we do those things for it to work for us.
And what's next for the business? I mean, I think you just alluded to it, talking of the $100 million of revenue and that sort of stuff. But the next 5 or 10 years, what does that hold for Madpaws?
Yeah, so I think we've got a huge opportunity to be really different in terms of the pet market here in Australia. You've got obviously a couple of really interesting players from a pet retail perspective. Your bricks and mortars and online players that are doing a good job. But I think nobody's kind of done what we've done now, is kind of combining the services side of things with the retail side. And that's a kind of unique proposition, and it's a unique advantage for us as well, because with the marketplace, we've got access to a whole lot more data about our customers and about their pets than you'd have as a retailer, right? I mean, think about it. You go and try buy a cheap bag of kibble from your retailer. You're not going to walk in there and answer 50 or 100 questions about your pet, right? You just want to have cheap bag of kibble. Where if you're trying to find somebody to look after your pet, right, for 2-3 weeks when you go to Europe, there's a big incentive for you to actually give us a lot of data about your pet, right? Because you want to make sure we find the right sitter. They might have behavioral issues, or might need medication, or they need certain specific foods and certain times and so forth, right? All that information we need to make sure that the sitter knows that we find the right sitter for you, and so we can obviously then use that information to tailor products and services for our pet owners. So I think that's the big opportunity, and for us that means we keep doing what we're doing, which is growing the business. But then on the other side, at the right time, I think there's also acquisition on the table again, where we can kind of accelerate our growth.
No, it's exciting, right?
Yeah, no, it's a very exciting time, and I think the team is in a very good space now. We've got a really, really tight-knit team, like I said at the beginning, but we've added a little bit of seniority to it now as well. And we've done the first couple of steps now to kind of bringing those businesses closer together and consolidate them. Because, obviously we bought 3 businesses, so we had kind of 4 different businesses. We're bringing them all closer together under the Madpaws banner. We've relaunched the Pet Chemist website, which is one of our brands. And, that's the first step that we had to do to kind of bring that under the Madpaws banner now as well. So we've done a lot of work from a data side and technology side to actually do what we want to do, which is having a single ecosystem for customers to get anything.
And then presumably you've got the synergies that go within that, and then the cross-selling opportunities within those businesses. And it sounds exciting.
That's the whole investment promise, right? It's kind of, we can get these businesses together, but yes, they're individually actually good businesses by itself already from a acquisition and unit economics perspective. But once we bring them together and we can start cross-selling even more than we do now, we've got a huge advantage over any kind of standalone business.
And one final question: the greatest basketballer of all time is?
I'd have to say Michael Jordan.
That's all right. We're on the same page. It's become a debate these days, LeBron or Jordan.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of good arguments on kind of why it's him. And I still think championships kind of count pretty highly. And it's also domination from a single player. So I'd have to go with him.
Yep. I'm behind you 100% on that one.
Awesome.
Justus, thanks very much for joining the show, mate. It was fantastic and great to hear your insights.
Thanks so much for having me.